Shavua Tov, a gute Woche, and welcome to our program. Shabbos morning, we read the Parsha of Tildis, and Shabbos to Mincha, we started the Parsha of Vayetze. And these Parshas are connected with what is happening now. These are the weeks of the Shlichus of Shluchim, and the Shlichus of Shluchim is always connected with Reish Chodesh Kislev, and this week, Friday, was Reish Chodesh Kislev. We find, as the Rebbe mentions, that although there is Shlichus also in the Parsha of Chayesoro, the Shlichus of Eliezer, and the Rebbe maintains that Eliezer was not just a Shadchan, Eliezer was also a Shliach. Nevertheless, the term Shlichus we find only in the Parsha of Tildis, Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov. And the Rebbe there sees the Shlichus of every Jew, because when it says Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov, the Rebbe sees in these words the Shlichus of every Jew. The Yitzchak is the Yitzchak Shebederenu, a reference to the previous Rebbe. So therefore, Vayishlach Yitzchak es Yaakov is the reference to the Frierdiker Rebbe. Es Yaakov is the reference to every single Jew. But there's something even deeper than that. One would ask, what about the Shlichus of the Rebbe himself? Did the Rebbe go on Shlichus? Where did he go on Shlichus? And how did his Shlichus go? Well, generally, that would be a little bit too much to ask. One is asking about the Rebbe's Shlichus. If the Rebbe had to go on Shlichus, it's the Rebbe's thing. And it's not for us to ask exactly how it was. Nevertheless, the Rebbe himself speaks about his own Shlichus. In the Sicha, and it's an extensive Sicha, of Shabbos Vayeshev, Tafshin Nun Beis, the Rebbe speaks about his own personal Shlichus, and it has a connection to our Sedras. We will return to that in a moment, but first, our customary story. This Sunday morning, I was at the Ehel, and I met a Jew who told me a story. Inasmuch as part of the story I heard before, but this Jew said that he knows the story from the family with whom this story happened. And this is the story he told me. It was 1949, and this individual would go to New Zealand for business. He went to New Zealand. I think he lived in Israel. He came from New Zealand to the United States, and from the United States he went to Israel. In the United States he had a daughter, and he went to visit her daughter. She lived in Manhattan in a building with an elevator. In the elevator, this is 1949, he meets a Rov with a very, very distinguished appearance. And this Rov gives him Shalom Aleichem in the elevator and asks him where he's coming from. And he says he's coming from New Zealand. And the Rov asks him, is there a mikveh in New Zealand? And he says he was only there for a few days himself. And he doesn't really know whether there's a mikveh there or not. So this distinguished looking Rov says to him that if a Jew is in a certain place, he has to do something about that place, something to that effect. And it's in an elevator, and the Rov said goodbye, and he left. He asks his daughter, who is this individual? And she says this is the son-in-law of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Again, this is 1949. 1989, 40 years later, the man is in the United States. And he wants to go and get $1 and a broche from the Rebbe. He stands in line together with everyone. and now he's in front of the Rebbe. And before the Rebbe gives him the dollar, the Rebbe looks at him, and the Rebbe asks, is there a mikveh in New Zealand already? When the Ger Rebbe, the Pnei Menachem, heard the story, this is all part of the story that I heard, he said that what got him here is not the fact that the Rebbe cared about a mikveh in New Zealand. That goes without saying. There are Jews in New Zealand, they need a mikveh. But what he saw here, that this is a span of 40 years. Over the 40 years, the Rebbe became a Rebbe and dealt with tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of people. And people are going through every Sunday thousands and thousands of people. And the Rebbe stopped and remembered and asked this Jew, is there 40 years later, and you can imagine, he didn't look the same. Over 40 years, a person changes. And instantaneously, the Rebbe recognized him, and the Rebbe asked him, is there a mikveh already in New Zealand? As mentioned, I heard this story this Sunday morning at the AL from an individual who has a connection to the family of the Jew with whom this story happened. Rabbi say concerning what the Rebbe mentioned, that it's a continuation of Shlichus. The Shlichus started in Parshas Chayesoro. It continued in Parshas Teildis, and Teildis we have the term Shlichus mentioned, and from Parshas Teildis it continues to Parshas Vayetze, because in Parshas Teildis it only says that Yitzchak appointed Yaakov as a shliach. It doesn't say yet that he went. When did Yaakov Ovinu start the shlichus? In the parsha that is after that, in the parsha that we started to Mincha, and that is the parsha of Vayetze. Mentioned before that the continuation of the psukim. So the Rebbe says that in the end of Parshas Teildis, we find that not only did Yitzchak send Yaakov, and I'm repeating it again, but Yitzchak sent Yaakov. Before he sent Yaakov, he gave him all the brachas. Vayishlach Yitzchak as Yaakov is the beginning of Shvi. 5 psukim before it says, Vayikra Yitzchak as Yaakov, Vayvorech Chesed, he gave him all the brachas. At the beginning of Shishi, of Teildis, V'yiten lecho Elokim, V'yiten v'yachzer v'yiten. So before the Shliach goes out on Shlichus, he already has all the brachas of the Mishaleach. And the Rebbe says in a Sikha extensively of Parshas Teildis that Shluchim come, and the first thing they do is ask for a bracha for Parnosa. They should be able to cover the budget in order for them to do the Shlichus. And the Rebbe justifies their question, because in order for them to be able to do their Shlichus successfully, they have to be able to devote all their time to the Shlichus. And if they are going to be busy with covering a bank, then they won't be able to devote all their time to the Shlichus. And the Rebbe answers that they already have all the brachas before they go to Shlichus. Mentioned before, the personal Shlichus of the Rebbe, and again, it's in our parsha, the very personal Shlichus of the Rebbe, and there are many, many parallels between that Shlichus, the Shlichus of the Rebbe, and the Shlichus of Yitzchak. Where do we see those parallels? In a Sikha of the Rebbe, of Parshas Vayeshev Tovshin Nun Beis. And there, in the Sikha of Parshas Vayeshev, the Rebbe speaks about France and about the Shlichus in France. And the Rebbe said that the Shlichus in France was to prepare France, and not only Paris and not only France, but the entire world for the Gula Ha'amitis V'Yashlemo. And the Rebbe starts by saying that the previous Rebbe, Sholach L'Shom Shluchim Mi B'nei Beisei, that the previous Rebbe sent to France Shluchim mibnei Beisei from his household. And later he says, his daughter and his son-in-law, chassidic ivnei, his son-in-law just like his son. Ve'ovdu avedosam, and they did their work, their service, belimud nigla de Torah upnimius haTorah. They learned nigla de Torah and they learned pnimius haTorah. Ve'chein sholach l'sham kisvei chassidus ve'gedeskeder shalei, and he sent kisvei chassidus and the Rebbe's letter and the letters of the previous Rebbe in order for the Rebbe to look them over and be able to present them. They should be able to be printed. Now, in a footnote to that Sikha, it says that at the end of the winter of Tofresh Tzadik Gimel, Tofresh Tzadik Gimel is 1933, but the end of the winter probably means the end of 1932. Hisiyashvu kwet gedushas ad Shlita, that the Rebbe settled v'harabonis atzitkonis moschais mushka nishmosa eden schuso yogen oleinu betzolfas, that they have settled in Solfas at the end of 1932, in the beginning of 1933. Shom doru kishmeina shonim atzef tafshin aleph, and there they lived for 8 years until the end of Tafshin Aleph. Tafshin Aleph is 1941. What is the Rebbe telling us? That number one, Sholach L'Shom. We all know the Rebbe was in France. And some people think that the reason the Rebbe was in France has to do with studies in the university. Comes the Rebbe in this Sikha, and he says, Sholach L'Shom. The previous Rebbe sent there. So, the Rebbe says clearly that the fact that he was in France is not that this was a trip to France. It's not that there was another purpose. There was one reason that why he was in France, why the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin were in France. Sholach L'Shom. This was not a trip. This was a Shlichus. The previous Rebbe sent the Rebbe to France. And not only that, what do we find? We find a parallel between that Shlichus and the Shlichus of Yaakov Ovinu. But the Shlichus of Yaakov Ovinu, it says, Vayishlach Yitzchok es Yaakov. And here the Rebbe makes sure to say that Yitzchok is a reference to the previous Rebbe. Yitzchok shebedeilenu, the Rebbe says that in Sefer HaSichos Tavshin Aleph. Yitzchok is a reference to the previous Rebbe, Yitzchok shebedeilenu. And who is the previous Rebbe sending? The Rebbe is sending Yaakov. Yaakov in the broader sense means every single Jew. And Yaakov also, Yaakov Nosi, Rosh Tevis, Nitzutz Shel Yaakov Ovinu, which means he sent the Rebbe, who was a Nitzutz of Yaakov Ovinu. Now, there is also a parallel between the places. Yitzchak sent Yaakov to where? We learned it now in the beginning of the Parsha that we read to Mincha. Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er Shova, vayelech Chorono. The Shlichus was in Choron. What is Choron? Charein af shel Elam, the wrath of the world. Moreover, it could have said, arguably, Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er Shova, vayelech lechoron. And Yaakov left Be'er Shova and he went to Choron. But it doesn't say Vayelech lechoron. It says Vayelech chorono. And Rashi already explains that sometimes there is a lam at the beginning of the word, like lechoron, and sometimes there is a hey at the end of the word, like chorono. And what is the difference? When it says Vayelech lechoron, it's only a geographic indication that he went from point A to point B. Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er Shova, vayelech lechoron, if it would say lechoron. It's also only indicative as to where he went. But when it says Vayelech Cholon, no, means he went into the depth of Cholon. He just didn't go into Cholon. He went into the very depth of Cholon. Because if Yaakov Ovinu was to work with Cholon, and he was to refine Cholon, then he had to go into the very depth of Cholon. He couldn't just go in fleetingly into Cholon, because he had to refine the entire Cholon, the depth of Cholon. The Rebbe draws the parallel. We said that Cholon is Chalein Avshalelom, the wrath of the world, and the Rebbe says concerning Paris, that he was sent just like by Yankov, it says, it was Cholon or Chalinav Shalelom. What is Paris? Elom hazeh atachten shein tachten lemato yimenu. That Paris is Mokem hatachten beyeser, the lowest place in the world. And a place of Tekev HaKlippe, of the strength of Klippe. And as the old story went, that if a Jew wanted to run away from his God, run away from his parents, run away from his tradition, the place to run to was Paris. So the Rebbe says in the Sikha, Mokim hatachten beyeser. So we see the parallel between the Shlichus of Yaakov Ovinu and the Shlichus of the Rebbe. The Shlichus of Yaakov Ovinu was Cholon, into the wrath of the world, and the Shlichus of the Rebbe was to Paris, Mokim hatachten beyeser, the lowest place in the world spiritually, and a place where of Tekev HaKlippe, where the Klippe is the strongest. Who was sent? It already said before. Who the Yitzchak sent? His son Yankov. And who did the previous Rebbe send? The Yitzchak Shebederenu, Chasnei Kivnei V'Yasbitei. This is a quote from the Rebbe. He sent Chasnei Kibnei, his son-in-law, who was like his son, V'Yasbitei and his daughter. That again is a parallel between the Shlichus of Yaakov of Yitzchak Ovinu, who sent Yaakov, his son, and Yitzchak Shebederenu, a reference to the previous Rebbe, who sent his son-in-law Chasnei Kibnei, his son-in-law like his son, the Rebbe, and his daughter. And the Rebbe said, what do they do there? And they did their service in learning Nigla de Torah upnimiyas Torah. Yes, there were visits to the academic world, but that was, if we know all the details and everything the Rebbe did in France, we know that occupied a very, very small portion of the Rebbe's time. And what did they do in Paris? They learned Nigle and Pnimiyas HaTorah and Chassidus v'davke metech Yerushalayim v'hidul. And with Yerushalayim and Ahidul, the Rebbe mentions that. And perhaps that is a reference to what Rashi says, Im lovon galti v'taliag mitzvah shomalti. Of course, it's not a chidush on the Rebbe that the Rebbe should do it mitech Yerushalayim v'hidul, but the Rebbe makes sure to say it. And as the stories unfolded later, mitech Yerushalayim v'hidul, one has to have a piece of bread. Where did the Rebbe get a piece of bread in Paris for 8 years? And the answer is, at first, he got the bread from the previous Rebbe. The previous Rebbe, who lived at that time in Poland, would send them by mail bread. Now you can imagine, you send bread internationally by mail. By the time the bread came from Poland to Paris, it wasn't exactly fresh. It was probably more crumbs than bread. But that is what the Rebbe ate. After that, the Rebbe found a bakery. And the story goes that the Rebbe would go every night, and he would throw in something into the fire. Something into the fire, that means that the fire, it's now Pas Yisrael. And the Rebbetzin once told a story. The Rebbe went to the bakery to buy some bread. So some Jew who was standing next to him says to the Rebbe, "You are buying from this bakery?" Don't you know this is questionable, this bakery? Says the Rebbe, ich im Breit echt nicht gewinnt. So the Rebbe stopped eating the bread. What happened? There was a competition, another bakery that started. So the way to take away customers from this bakery, they got somebody to stand at the door. Whether it's correct or not is a story for another day. And he would ask, you are buying over here? Don't you know that it's questionable? Only purpose was because there's another bakery that's opening. So the way they are going to get the customers, they're going to take away the customers from this bakery. So even bread we didn't have. The Rebbetzin herself, our Rebbetzin, the queen, would go for kilometers to a farm and to watch the milking. Can you imagine the Rebbetzin in all of her royalty went to a farm, stand there not far from the cows, to watch the milking so she can take some milk and bring to the Rebbe, and from the milk she would make butter and cheese and so on. The Rebbetzin herself. They lived in Paris, and it's known. The residences where they lived in a room and a half, in the most difficult conditions. There's a story of a Jew who says he spent sukkahs with the Rebbe. And how was that? The Rebbe lived in the Latin Quarter in Paris in a very small apartment. And the Rebbe sees him on the street before sukkahs. He didn't know who the Rebbe was. But the Rebbe sees a person walking on the street, and he's very worried. And the Rebbe stops him. And the Rebbe asks him, well, you look very, very worried. What's the matter? And he says, it's Erev Sukkahs. I don't have a sukkah. And the Rebbe says, what's the problem? You come and eat with me in my sukkah. He came to eat. And then he realized when he came that the sukkah was so small, it only had 2 seats. That's all that the sukkah was able to make. The Rebbe was able to make a sukkah for 2 people. Because as you know, sukkahs in Paris are very difficult. And so he ate in the Rebbetzins place. So the Rebbetzin ate at home or later, and he ate in the sukkah. Years later, he came in to see the Rebbe. And he didn't know who he's coming in to see. When he came in, the Rebbe says, we know each other. And the man says, I don't remember. And the Rebbe said, we had the honor of having you in our sukkah. So this was a sukkah for 2 people, and a room and a half, and difficult conditions. And the Rebbetzin stood in the Pletzel, watching how they were preparing the meat, watching how they were soaking the meat. These were the conditions that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin lived. And it's not only that, to the extent that there were days where there were periods where the Rebbe would fast every single day. And the Rebbe would sit a whole day in Talis and Film and learn while he was fasting. In Paris, in that decadent city of Paris, this is how the Rebbe conducted himself. In the most spiritual way. Can you imagine something greater than seeing the Rebbe? And there were some people who saw that. They seeing the Rebbe at the end of the day, sitting in Talis and Film learning, and the Rebbe was fasting. All this in the town of Paris. And the Rebbe says, and there many things were prepared for print. The first time in the history of Chassidus where a pamphlet of Chassidus was printed into another language besides Hebrew and Yiddish. And that is, at that time, it was printed into German. And the Rebbe checked over every word. And the Rebbe said that writes that he made sure that everything should be perfect, because if this attempt would be successful, this attempt of translating Chassidus into a foreign language would be successful, then it's going to continue later. Baruch Hashem, it was successful, and the Rebbe's publishing house, Baruch Hashem, publishes tens and tens of thousands of Sfodim in all Shivim Loshen all over the world. The beginning of that was in Paris, and the Rebbe himself took care of every part of the print. The Rebbe himself make sure that it was the right paper and the right size and so on. All of this the Rebbe did in Paris. There was a periodical called Hatomim. It went out it was printed in Poland. The previous Rebbe writes to the Rebbetzin that on paper there are editors, and you can see, you open up the Hatomim, you see names of editors in English, chassidic, and so on. He says, but all the work was the Rebbe's. Everything was sent to the Rebbe to Paris, and the Rebbe is the one who edited everything, although his name did not appear on it. The previous Rebbe writes that. Also, the time of the Shlichus. There's a parallel there. So the Rebbe says, Yaakov was by Lavan a lot of years. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin were there for 8 years. And the Rebbe explains that if you want to come to a place, if you want to have an effect on the place, you can't come there fleetingly. Because if you are going to be there fleetingly, you'll come from time to time for a visit, you'll stay for a day, for a week, maybe sometimes a month, then you're going to leave, then you're going to come back. You cannot really work with the place and refine the place and reach the very essence of the place. The Rebbe writes that. However, when you are there for a long time, then it could be hislapshus pnimis. It can be an inner settlement, and therefore you can have an inner effect on the people in the city. And this is exactly what the Rebbe did. Now, we see the parallel again, although the Rebbe doesn't mention that plot. We see the parallel again. At the end of the beginning of the Shlichus of Yaakov Ovinu, when Yitzchak appointed him as a shliach, it says, Vayetze Yaakov maybe the Shova Vayelech Chorono. When he went to Choron, Yaakov Ovinu, right after that, we see it in our Parsha, received the greatest brachas that he ever received. He had great brachas before. V'yiten l'cho ha'elikim. Yitzchak said to him, the Almighty God should give you a bikas Avrom. Nevertheless, the greatest bracha of all, and as the Gemara terms it, nachlo b'li mitzolim, an inheritance without boundaries, Yaakov got when he went out on Shlichus, right at the beginning of Parshas Vayetze. And there he got the blessing, you guessed, of Ufaratzto yomo v'kedmo v'tzofeino v'negbo. And why is that such a great blessing? Because it's a nachlo b'li mitzolim. Ufaratzto means you should spread out. You should spread out the yomo. Yomo means to the south. How much to the south? As much as you can. No boundaries. V'kedmo is to the east, to the south, to the east, to the north, to the west. Kedmo is east, as we mentioned. In other words, wherever you're going to spread, whether it's going to be south, there's no boundaries. South until the end. East until the end. North until the end. West, everything, and b'li mitzolim. When did Yaakov Ovinu get that blessing? When he went out on Shlichus. And the Rebbe, when he went out on Shlichus to France, he got a similar bracha. Yaakov Ovinu got the bracha of Ufaratzto, and the Rebbe got the bracha of Poratzto. Poratzto, the Rebbe himself says, is Asius Tzorfas. And we see how precious the Shlichus of Tzorfas and the Shluchim of Tzorfas were to the Rebbe. The Rebbe himself sang the song, Hoderes V'amunu Lecha Yelomim, and that the Rebbe said that this is the French Revolution, the good way, Le Malyusa, that this is the French Revolution that happened with the Shluchim in France. So Yaakov Ovinu got Ufaratzto, the Rebbe got Tzorfas, is Asius Poratzto. And at the end of the Sikha, the Rebbe reveals to us the secret as to why the Rebbe had to be in Paris. And the Rebbe says, in order to refine the most difficult place or the lowest place, you can only do that through the Hisgalus Ha'etzem, through the revelation of the essence. And the essence is the one that makes that birur, that refinement. Which means that Rebbe is telling us that in order to refine the most difficult place of the world, you need the etzem. And it's known by Chassidus. The etzem is the Rebbe. The chassidic ispashtus is the extension. The essence is the Rebbe himself. So in order to break through the lowest place in the world, you needed the etzem. And this is why the Rebbe was there. And the Rebbe says that through the fact that the etzem is going to break through the lowest denomination, the lowest part in the world, through that we will break through the whole thing. Which means that through the fact that the Rebbe himself broke through Tzolfas, the most difficult Dechalei Nafsha Leilom, through this we were able to break through the entire world. So the Rebbe reveals to us the secret of France. And the secret as to why he himself, the Rebbe himself, was sent to France. And through this, through the fact that the Rebbe was able to refine the Mokem Achi Nomuch, the lowest place, through this, then the act of refining the world was able to continue all over the world. Which means, now, Baruch Hashem, Kinus HaShluchim, over 5,000 Shluchim. Who is the one who started that Shlichus revelation? Or that Shlichus revolution all over the world? The Rebbe himself. By being there not fleetingly, but by being there 8 years, the Rebbe prepared France and Paris, and through that, the entire world for one purpose, for the coming of Moshiach. Which means that the Rebbe's being in Paris has a direct connection with refining the world and preparing the world for Moshiach. Baruch Hashem Rabbi say, today, they are, as mentioned, over 5,000 Shluchim all over the world, in 106, 107 countries all over the world, and doing the Rebbe's work of Ufalatzto, Yomo, Vokedmo, Vetzofeno, Vonegbo. And in Mirza Hashem, the work of the Rebbe is going to be crowned with the greatest of success by refining the entire world and preparing the world for that great and wonderful day of the coming of Mashiach, speedily in our very, very own days. ובעגולו דידנו ושמחו ובטוב לבוב ובטבע נירה והניגלה ולמטה מעשרות טפוחים ובחסד וברחמים, and תקף ומיד ממש.